Homeless oldie man helps Michael Jordan change car tire next day. He gets the shock of his life. Life has a funny way of bringing people together when they least expect it. On a cold autumn evening in Chicago, as the sun began to set behind the city's iconic skyline, two worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way. A homeless old man helping Michael Jordan change a car tire would soon become a story that would touch millions. They say you never truly know a person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. For Harold Jenkins, those shoes were worn-down boots, patched together more times than he could count. At 68, his weathered face told the story of a man who had seen both fortune and misfortune throughout his years. Once a respected mechanic with his own garage, a series of unfortunate events, a devastating fire, medical bills that piled up faster than he could pay them, and the loss of his beloved wife, had left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a small cart of possessions he pushed around the streets of Chicago. Despite life's hardships, Harold maintained a dignity that couldn't be broken. His eyes still sparkled with kindness, and his hands, though calloused and shaking slightly from age, remained skilled, remembering every tool they had once held with precision and care. That evening, as the temperature dropped and most people hurried home to warmth and comfort, Harold was making his way along a quiet stretch of road on the outskirts of the city. This was his usual route, less crowded, fewer stares from strangers, and occasionally a peaceful place to rest for the night. The sound of an expensive engine caught his attention first, a smooth, powerful purr that suddenly sputtered and died. Then came the unmistakable thud of a flat tire hitting asphalt, followed by a frustrated sigh that carried through the still evening air. Harold paused, leaning on his cart. He could have continued walking. After all, whoever was driving that luxury car certainly had the means to call for help. But something made him stop. Perhaps it was the mechanic in him, the part of his soul that still longed to fix things, to be useful again. As he rounded the bend, Harold saw a sleek black SUV pulled over to the side. A tall man in an expensive tracksuit was standing beside it, phone in hand, looking both annoyed and slightly bewildered as he stared at the flat tire. There was something oddly familiar about him, the way he stood, the confident set of his shoulders despite the situation. "Trouble with your tire, sir?" Harold called out, his voice raspier than it once had been. The man looked up, surprise flickering across his face at the sight of the elderly homeless man approaching him. For a moment, Harold expected to be dismissed. It wouldn't be the first time someone had waved him away without a second glance, but instead, the man offered a tired smile. "Yeah, blew out on this stretch of road. I've got a spare, but..." He gestured vaguely at his pristine clothes. That's when recognition dawned on Harold. Even years removed from his prime, there was no mistaking one of the greatest basketball players to ever live. Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan, was standing just feet away, looking at his flat tire with the same frustrated expression any ordinary person might have. "I could help you change it," Harold offered, before he could second-guess himself. "Used to run my own garage for 30 years. Changing tires was like tying shoelaces to me." Jordan looked skeptical, understandably so. Harold knew what he must look like. An old homeless man with dirty clothes and wild gray hair, not exactly the first person you'd trust with your luxury vehicle. "I appreciate the offer, but I've got roadside assistance coming," Jordan replied, though the glance at his watch suggested they weren't arriving as quickly as he'd hoped. Harold nodded, about to continue on his way when the wind picked up, cutting through his thin jacket like it wasn't even there. He couldn't suppress the shiver that ran through him. Jordan noticed. For a moment, he seemed to be considering something. Then, "Actually, how about this? I've got tools in the back. If you can show me how to change it properly, that would be great. It's been a while since I've had to do this myself." Harold knew it was just a kind excuse to help him out. A man like Michael Jordan probably had people handling such mundane tasks for him. But the opportunity to be useful again, to practice his craft, even for a few minutes, that was worth more than any handout. "I'd be happy to, Mr. Jordan," Harold said, setting his cart safely to the side of the road. A flicker of surprise crossed Jordan's face. "You recognized me, huh?" Harold chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to lighten the chilly air around them. "Sir, I may be down on my luck, but I'm still from Chicago." Watching you play for the Bulls gave me some of the best memories of my life." As Jordan opened the trunk to retrieve the spare tire and tools, Harold felt a sense of purpose that had been absent for too long. His hands, though older and shakier than they once were, moved with muscle memory as he instructed Jordan on positioning the jack correctly. "The trick is to make sure it's on solid ground," Harold explained, demonstrating with careful precision. "Nothing worse than having a car slip off a jack. Saw that happen once, nearly took a man's foot off." Jordan listened attentively, asking questions here and there, showing a respect for Harold's expertise that the old man hadn't experienced in years. There was no pity in his eyes, just genuine appreciation for the knowledge being shared. As they worked together, Harold's fingers grew more nimble, his movements more confident. The years seemed to fall away, if only for these few moments. The homeless man and the basketball legend, working side by side in the gathering darkness, illuminated only by the SUV's hazard lights blinking rhythmically. "You know," Jordan said as Harold tightened the lug nuts with practiced efficiency, "you remind me of my father. He could fix anything. Always said there was no substitute for experience." Harold paused, touched by the comparison. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "The wisest I've ever known," Jordan replied, a note of genuine emotion in his voice. When the job was finished, Harold stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag that Jordan had offered him from the trunk. The tire was changed perfectly, no different than the hundreds, perhaps thousands, he had changed throughout his career. "That should get you where you need to go, Mr. Jordan," Harold said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Just remember not to go above 50 with that spare. They're not made for high speeds." Jordan nodded, looking at the changed tire with appreciation. "You did that like a pro. I would have been waiting another hour for roadside assistance." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. "Let me give you something for your trouble." Harold raised his hand, shaking his head. "No need for that, sir. It was my pleasure to help." In that moment, standing there on the darkening road, Harold felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. Not the forced kind he tried to maintain while asking for spare change or searching for a safe place to sleep, but real dignity. The kind that comes from using your skills to help another person, from being valued for what you can contribute rather than pitied for what you lack. What Harold didn't know, as he picked up his cart and prepared to continue on his way, was that this chance encounter, this moment of helping Michael Jordan change a car tire on a cold Chicago evening, was about to change the course of his life forever. The night grew colder as Harold continued his journey, still thinking about the surreal experience of having just helped Michael Jordan change a car tire. For a brief moment, his hands had remembered their purpose, and the basketball legend had treated him with a respect that homeless people rarely received on the streets of Chicago. Harold had no idea that Jordan was still watching him shuffle away, deep in thought about the dignified old man who had refused payment for his help. As Harold found his usual spot beneath the bridge, laying out his worn blanket on the concrete, Michael Jordan was making a phone call from his car. The basketball icon sat in the warmth of his luxury SUV, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the steering wheel as the call connected. "Marcus, it's MJ. Listen, I need you to do something for me first thing tomorrow," Jordan said, his voice carrying the same determination that had made him legendary on the court. "I just met someone I want to help." Meanwhile, Harold settled in for another night under the stars, his only comfort the distant memory of a life once lived. A small house, a successful garage, the smell of motor oil, and the satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. Little did he know that the wheels of fate had begun turning the moment he offered to help with that flat tire. Morning came with a harsh brightness that stirred Harold from his fitful sleep. His joints ached more than usual, the price of working on Jordan's tire the previous evening. Still, there was a small smile on his face as he remembered the brief return to his former life, the familiar feel of tools in his hands, the simple joy of solving a problem. Harold began his morning ritual, folding his blanket, organizing his few possessions in the cart, and planning which part of the city might be most generous with spare change or leftover food today. Tuesday meant the bakery on 43rd might have day-old bread to give away. The thought of fresh bread lifted his spirits slightly as he pushed his cart along the awakening streets. He had made it about 6 blocks when a sleek black car pulled up alongside him. The window rolled down, revealing a young man in a crisp suit. "Harold Jenkins?" the man asked. Harold stopped, suspicious and confused. No one had addressed him by his full name in years. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus Williams. I work for Mr. Michael Jordan," the man explained, stepping out of the car. "He asked me to find you." Harold's weathered brow furrowed. There must be some mistake. "No mistake, sir. Mr. Jordan was quite specific in his description." Marcus smiled warmly. "He was impressed with your help last night and would like to meet with you properly. He's invited you to breakfast." Harold looked down at his tattered clothes, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm not exactly dressed for a meeting with Michael Jordan." Marcus gestured to the car. "That's been taken care of, sir. If you're willing, there's a place you can clean up before the meeting, and some fresh clothes waiting for you." For a moment, Harold hesitated. Years on the street had taught him to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. But something in the young man's earnest expression, and the memory of Jordan's respectful demeanor the night before, made him nod slowly. "I suppose I could do that," he said, still uncertain. Marcus helped secure Harold's cart in the trunk of the car, treating the old man's possessions with a respect that further eased his concerns. As they drove through the city, Harold watched the familiar streets pass by, wondering what could possibly come from this unexpected turn of events. They arrived at a small but upscale hotel, where Marcus led Harold to a room that had been prepared for him. A hot shower, his first in months, washed away layers of grime. The fresh clothes fit surprisingly well, and when Harold caught his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion had been a dignified older gentleman all along. An hour later, clean-shaven and dressed in clothes that restored some of his former dignity, Harold was escorted to a private dining room in the hotel's restaurant. And there, waiting at the table, was Michael Jordan himself. "Mr. Jenkins," Jordan greeted him, rising to shake his hand. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "Thank you for extending it," Harold replied, still somewhat dazed by the surreal nature of the situation. "Though I'm not entirely sure why I'm here." Jordan gestured for him to sit. "Please, join me for breakfast first, then we can talk." The meal that followed was the best Harold had eaten in years. Eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, and coffee that tasted like heaven after years of gas station dregs or whatever the shelters served. Throughout the meal, Jordan asked questions about Harold's life, listening intently as the old man shared fragments of his story. His garage, the fire that wasn't covered by insurance, his wife's illness, and the medical bills that drained their savings. The slow descent into homelessness that had seemed impossible until it became his reality. "You know," Jordan said thoughtfully as their plates were cleared, "what impressed me last night wasn't just that you knew how to change a tire. It was your pride in your work, even after everything you've been through. That's something I've always respected. People who take pride in what they do, no matter the circumstances." Harold nodded, a lump forming in his throat at being truly seen for the first time in years. "I have a proposition for you," Jordan continued. "I own several businesses here in Chicago, including an automotive customization shop. They're looking for someone with real experience. Not just technical skills, but the kind of knowledge that only comes from decades in the business." Harold's heart began to race. "Mr. Jordan, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm 68 years old. Nobody's looking to hire someone my age, especially someone who's been," he hesitated, "out of the workforce for so long." Jordan leaned forward, his expression serious. "Age is just a number, Mr. Jenkins. Experience is invaluable. My shop manager reviewed the spare tire installation you did last night, said it was textbook perfect, better than some of his younger mechanics could manage." "You had someone check my work?" Harold asked, surprised. "I did," Jordan nodded, "and they were impressed. The position I'm offering is part consulting, part hands-on work, teaching the younger mechanics the things they don't learn in technical school, the wisdom that comes from 30 years of solving real problems." Harold sat in stunned silence, unable to process what was happening. After years of rejection, of becoming invisible to society, here was one of the most famous men in the world offering him a chance, not out of pity, but because of his skills. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. Say you'll consider it, Jordan replied. The position comes with a salary and benefits, and there's an apartment above the shop that's been sitting empty. It could be yours as part of the package. A roof over his head, a job using his skills, a chance to reclaim his dignity. It seemed impossible, like a dream Harold was afraid to believe in, case it vanished upon waking. Why would you do this for me? Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jordan's expression softened. Sometimes, Mr. Jenkins, life knocks us down hard. I've been fortunate in many ways, but I've never forgotten the people who helped me when I needed it, or the lessons my father taught me about recognizing the value in others. Last night, when you helped me change that tire, you didn't ask for anything in return. You just saw a problem you could fix, and you fixed it. The world needs more of that spirit. As the reality of the opportunity began to sink in, Harold felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just the fleeting hope for a warm meal or a safe place to sleep, but real hope for a future. All because he had stopped to help Michael Jordan change a tire on a cold Chicago evening. 1 week had passed since that fateful night when a homeless old man helped Michael Jordan change a car tire on the side of a Chicago road. Harold Jenkins stood in front of Jordan Automotive Customs, his reflection barely recognizable in the gleaming glass doors of the high-end shop. Gone was the disheveled appearance of a man who had spent years on the streets. In its place stood someone beginning to remember who he used to be, who he still was beneath the hardship. The past 7 days had been a whirlwind of change. After accepting Jordan's offer, Harold had been given a modest but comfortable apartment above the shop, complete with basic furnishings, and, most importantly, a proper bed. His few possessions from the streets had been carefully moved in, though many had been respectfully replaced with new necessities, a gesture that brought tears to the old man's eyes. Today was his first official day of work, and nervous energy coursed through his veins as he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The shop was unlike any garage he had ever worked in, immaculate, state-of-the-art, filled with luxury vehicles in various stages of customization. Young mechanics in crisp uniforms moved with purpose around the space, their focus intense as they worked on cars worth more than Harold could even imagine. "There he is," a booming voice called out. Marcus, Jordan's assistant who had found Harold on the streets, approached with a warm smile and extended hand. "Ready for your first day, Mr. Jenkins?" Harold nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Great. Let me introduce you to the team." As Marcus led him through the shop, Harold was introduced to mechanics, designers, and specialists, each greeting him with varying degrees of curiosity and respect. Some seemed skeptical of the old man Jordan had personally hired, while others were immediately eager to tap into his decades of experience. The shop manager, a no-nonsense woman named Elaine with short gray hair and sharp eyes, assessed him carefully. "So you're the miracle worker who impressed the boss," she said, her tone not unkind, but certainly reserved. "Jordan doesn't usually take such personal interest in staffing decisions." "I just changed a tire," Harold said modestly. "Been doing it since before most of these young folks were born." Elaine's expression softened slightly. "Well, we've got a bit more complicated work than tire changes around here, but something tells me you'll manage. Come on, let's get you set up." The morning was spent familiarizing Harold with the shop's operations, the specialized tools, and the computer systems used to track orders and inventory, technology that hadn't existed when he ran his own garage. Despite the learning curve, Harold's hands remembered tools, and his mind quickly grasped concepts that were rooted in the fundamentals he'd mastered decades ago. By lunchtime, he had already helped diagnose a mysterious rattling in a Bentley that had stumped 2 younger mechanics and suggested a more efficient approach to a custom exhaust installation. The initial skepticism from some team members was beginning to melt away in the face of his undeniable expertise. "You're catching on quick," Elaine noted as they sat in the break room, Harold savoring a sandwich that he didn't have to scavenge or stand in line for at a shelter. Some of these kids have all the technical knowledge in the world, but lack the problem-solving skills that come from experience. Harold nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Back in my day, we didn't have computers to tell us what was wrong. We had to use our ears, our hands, and our brains. Sometimes the old ways still work best." "That's exactly why you're here," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Both Harold and Elaine looked up to see Michael Jordan himself standing there, casual yet commanding in jeans and a simple polo shirt. The other employees in the break room straightened instantly, surprise and awe evident on their faces. "Mr. Jordan," Elaine greeted him, "didn't know you were stopping by today." "Wanted to see how our newest team member is settling in," Jordan replied, his gaze settling warmly on Harold. "Mind if I borrow him for a minute?" Harold followed Jordan to a quiet corner of the shop, still somewhat disbelieving that this was his new reality, having casual conversations with one of the greatest basketball players of all time. "So, how's it going?" Jordan asked, his attention completely focused on Harold, despite the stares from others in the shop. "It's overwhelming," Harold admitted honestly. "A week ago, I was sleeping under a bridge, and now I'm here. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Jordan nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that feeling. But this is real, Mr. Jenkins, and from what Elaine tells me, you're already proving that my instincts about you were right." "I'm trying my best," Harold said. "Some of the technology is new to me, but cars are still cars at their core. They still have hearts that need tending, just like people." A smile spread across Jordan's face. "That's exactly the kind of wisdom I wanted in this shop. The young mechanics here are talented, but they need someone who understands that it's not just about the technology, it's about passion and respect for the craft." As their conversation continued, Jordan shared his vision for the shop. Not just a place that customized expensive cars, but a business that valued craftsmanship and took pride in every detail. It was a philosophy that resonated deeply with Harold, reminding him of the principles he had built his own garage on years ago. "There's one more thing," Jordan said as their talk wound down. "I'm hosting a charity gala this weekend, fundraising for youth homelessness programs in Chicago. I'd like you to come as my guest." Harold blinked in surprise. "Me? At a gala? I wouldn't know how to act around all those important people." Jordan's expression grew serious. "Harold, you are an important person. Your story, your journey, matters. And if you're comfortable sharing it, it could inspire a lot of people to see homelessness differently, to see the humanity and potential in everyone, regardless of their circumstances." The thought was terrifying and humbling all at once. Harold had spent years trying to be invisible on the streets, and now Jordan was suggesting he step into the spotlight to let his experience serve a greater purpose. I'll think about it," he managed to say. Jordan seemed satisfied with that answer. "That's all I ask." He checked his watch. "I've got to run, but I'll check in again soon. Keep up the good work, Harold." As Jordan departed, Harold returned to the shop floor, his mind spinning with the conversation. The other employees looked at him with new interest, clearly wondering what the legendary Michael Jordan had wanted to discuss with the former homeless man. But Harold's focus had already returned to the Bentley he'd been diagnosing earlier. As he leaned over the engine, his hands steady and sure, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just purpose, but pride. Pride in his work, pride in his knowledge, pride in the person he was rediscovering beneath years of hardship and invisibility. The Tyre change that had brought him into Michael Jordan's life had been just the beginning. Now, with each passing hour in the shop, Harold Jenkins was changing his own tire, replacing a worn-out existence with a new journey forward. 3 months had transformed Harold Jenkins's life completely. What began with a simple act of kindness, a homeless old man helping Michael Jordan change a car tire on a deserted Chicago road, had blossomed into something neither could have imagined that cold autumn evening. Harold stood before the mirror in his apartment, adjusting the bow tie of his tuxedo with fingers that still bore the calluses of a lifetime of mechanical work, but no longer trembled with hunger or cold. Tonight was special. The Jordan Foundation was hosting its annual gala, but this year's event was focused specifically on combating homelessness in Chicago, inspired in part by Harold's journey. He had come to represent something powerful, the human potential that so often goes unseen when people look past those living on the streets. The past 3 months at Jordan Automotive Customs had been transformative. Harold had quickly become an invaluable member of the team, his decades of experience complementing the technical knowledge of the younger mechanics. The skepticism he'd initially faced had given way to genuine respect, with many of the staff now seeking his guidance on particularly challenging projects. Beyond the shop, Harold's story had begun to spread. At Jordan's encouragement, he had spoken at several community events, sharing his experience of homelessness with unflinching honesty. His words carried weight, not just the hardship, but the dehumanizing invisibility, the assumption that someone without a home has nothing to offer society. A knock at his door broke his reverie. "Car's here, Mr. Jenkins," called Marcus's voice. Harold took one final look in the mirror, hardly recognizing the dignified gentleman who looked back at him. "Coming," he replied, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. The gala was being held at one of Chicago's most prestigious hotels, its ballroom transformed into an elegant wonderland of lights and flowers. As Harold entered, he could feel eyes turning toward him, not with the avoidance or pity he'd known on the streets, but with interest and respect. Michael Jordan broke away from a conversation and crossed the room with his characteristic purposeful stride. "Harold," he greeted him warmly, clasping his hand. "You clean up nice." Harold chuckled. "Not bad for an old grease monkey." "More than that, and you know it," Jordan replied, his expression growing serious. "Are you ready for tonight?" Harold nodded. They had discussed this moment extensively. Tonight, he would be formally introduced as the first director of the Jenkins Initiative, a new program funded by the Jordan Foundation to provide vocational training and employment opportunities specifically for homeless individuals with trade skills that had gone unutilized. The evening progressed with the typical elements of a charity gala: exquisite food, flowing champagne, silent auctions for extravagant prizes. Harold observed it all with a mixture of wonder and detachment, still not quite believing that he belonged in such surroundings. Yet, whenever uncertainty crept in, someone would approach, sometimes a celebrity, sometimes a business leader, eager to hear his insights on addressing the homelessness crisis from someone who had lived it. "They respect you," Jordan commented when they had a moment alone. "Not because of me, but because of who you are and what you represent." Harold looked around the glittering ballroom. If they'd seen me 3 months ago, pushing my cart down Michigan Avenue, most of these people wouldn't have given me a second glance. "That's exactly why your voice matters," Jordan said firmly. "You're changing how they see the issue, putting a human face on it." When the time came for the speeches, Harold felt his heart pounding as Jordan took the stage. The ballroom fell silent as the basketball legend tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Jordan began. "We're here to address a crisis that affects thousands in our city. Men, women, and yes, families with children who don't have a place to call home." He paused, surveying the room. "But tonight, I want to tell you a story about chance encounters and untapped potential, about how we often fail to see the value in people when they're at their lowest point." Jordan recounted that fateful night, the flat tire, Harold's offer of help, the dignity and expertise he displayed despite years of hardship. As the story unfolded, Harold felt the weight of every eye in the room upon him. "What struck me most," Jordan continued, "wasn't just Harold's skill, but his humanity, his willingness to help a stranger when he had so little himself. It made me wonder how many others like him are out there, people with talents, skills, and wisdom that we're wasting because we've allowed them to become invisible." Jordan gestured for Harold to join him on stage. With steady steps, Harold made his way forward, standing beside the man who had changed his life through a simple act of recognition. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce Harold Jenkins," Jordan announced, former business owner, master mechanic, and now the director of the Jenkins Initiative, our new program that will provide vocational training and employment pathways for homeless individuals with existing trade skills. The applause was thunderous. As Harold stepped to the microphone, the faces before him blurred slightly with the tears that threatened to fall. "3 months ago," Harold began, his voice strong despite his emotion, "I was invisible, just another old man on the streets that most people worked hard not to see." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The hardest part of homelessness isn't always the cold or the hunger, though those are brutal. It's the loss of identity, the feeling that you no longer exist in the eyes of society. As Harold shared his story, the room remained silent, captivated. He spoke of his former life, the series of misfortunes that led to his homelessness, and the skills that remained within him, even when everything else was lost. What Michael did wasn't just give me a job or a place to live, Harold concluded. He saw me, really saw me, when everyone else had trained themselves to look past people like me. That recognition, that simple acknowledgement of human dignity, can be more powerful than any handout. He outlined the Jenkins Initiative, how it would identify homeless individuals with trade backgrounds, provide refresher training, stable housing, and paths to employment with partner businesses. We're not just talking about charity, Harold emphasized. We're talking about reclaiming wasted human potential, about remembering that a person's circumstances don't define their worth or abilities. As he finished speaking, the room erupted in a standing ovation. Harold stood there, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought him to this moment, from a bridge underpass to a podium before the city's elite. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Harold found himself standing beside Jordan, watching as donation pledges for the initiative continued to pour in, far exceeding their initial goals. "How does it feel?" Jordan asked quietly. Harold considered the question carefully. "Like coming full circle," he finally replied, "from being someone no one would look at to someone people actually listen to." Jordan nodded thoughtfully. "You know, my father always used to say that a person's true character is revealed in how they treat others when they think no one is watching. That night, when you stopped to help me with that tire, you had no idea who I was at first. You just saw someone who needed help. And I had no idea where it would lead," Harold added with a smile. As the evening came to a close, Harold Jenkins, no longer homeless, no longer invisible, looked out at the Chicago skyline from the hotel's terrace. The city that had once been so indifferent to his existence now held new promise, not just for him, but for others still struggling on its streets. A chance encounter, a flat tire, a moment of recognition. Sometimes the smallest points of connection can change not just one life, but many. And for Harold, the journey had only just begun. If this story of how a homeless old man helped Michael Jordan change a tire touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button right now to help others discover this powerful message of dignity and second chances. Has a simple act of kindness ever changed your life? Or have you ever helped someone without knowing how much impact it would have? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, we never know the full potential of the people we pass by every day. Sometimes, all it takes is seeing someone for who they truly are, just like Michael Jordan did when that homeless old man stopped to help him change his tire. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Click that notification bell so you never miss our daily uploads that prove how a single moment of connection can change everything. Together, we can recognize the dignity and potential in everyone, regardless of their circumstances. Thank you for watching. Remember, it's not about how famous or wealthy you are, it's about how you treat others when no one is watching. See you in our next video.